Vice Lieutenant, Mayor, honoured guests, I'll keep my style short, but to say it is a huge privilege to be here in Rotherham today on Armed Forces Day. I brought my Navy News with me, which has got my notes on it. It is enormously important to celebrate Armed Forces Day, and that's what Armed Forces Day is about. It's a celebration. How did it come about? It came about 10 years ago when it was decided and felt that the armed forces were not getting out enough into the country, into the streets, and parading who they were. We'd been through a period of Irish terrorism, and we were quite worried that the profile of the armed forces was dropping away. So there was something originally called Veterans Day, and that changed into Armed Forces Day. And the result is what you see around us today, which is a fantastic parade. And thank you everybody who's made an enormous effort to turn out so smartly today. It looks tremendous in a town square of a major town in the United Kingdom, and really well supported by so many of you looking on. That's exactly what Armed Forces Day should be, and I thank you for that. The armed forces themselves are busy. It's fashionable to say they've never been busier. Of course, we're now back from Afghanistan, and after a period, 10 years of war, really, in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But they are busy, and you'll all have seen in your headlines and on your TV screens scenes of my service, the Royal Navy, and HMS Bulwark, involved in the current crisis of migration coming across from the African continent. You'll also be aware that my service has been very closely involved with the Ebola outbreak down in Sierra Leone, and took a major part in that. Threats don't go away. We live in a dangerous world, and it's a world that the armed forces have to be involved in. We're all aware of the Ukraine situation and the position of Russia, which is currently arming itself with new missiles as we speak. We're all aware of ISIS and the problems in Iraq and in Syria, and indeed of any knock-on effect in our own towns and cities. These things are not going to go away, and neither is the problem of migration either. So there's plenty for us to do, and there is plenty for the armed services to be part of Britain punching its weight in the world and being a force for good. What is coming up shortly, and it's a huge pleasure that our MP is here, is a major review of the armed forces. That is very important, and I would suggest that it's very important that the country continues to spend 2% of its gross demographic product, that's the GDP, its money, on the armed forces. Why is that important? It's a statement of a commitment to NATO, which is our primary alliance, and indeed it is part of our profile in the world that causes us to be one of the 5 permanent member countries of the United Nations Security Council, the top table for which international security decisions are made. It is important, and I believe we should be there, and that is part of what we are doing here today as armed forces. But it's not all doom and gloom. The armed forces are a fantastic institution, an important part of our country, our social fabric, and our social fabric which is completely interwoven with our communities. And so that is a key bit of armed forces today. The armed forces represent a fantastic career and career option, particularly for you younger people and cadets who have not yet experienced it. Opportunities to learn trades, get discipline, and to participate in later life back in your own civic communities. If you don't wish to become a member of the armed forces themselves, I commend to you the reserves. The reserves, as you're probably aware, are developing as a key part of our national armoury and are recruiting heavily at the moment. And indeed, if you don't wish to be part of that, do support your cadets forces who provide such an important part, again, of the fabric of our societies and do so much for our young people. And I think you can see the effect of how good it is in the cadets here today and that fantastic performance from the Barnsley Band. Thank you. I think we should also acknowledge on a Armed Forces Day that the Armed Forces does have a downside. People do die. In my last job, I was the Chief Executive of the National Memorial Army.